Welcome to Breaking Bread, hosted by me, Krong Chocolate, a show where we break verbal bread with a quote unquote enemy. Whenever Manchester City has an upcoming match, I will be here having a conversation with a supporter of City's upcoming opponents. Subscribe to our $6 tier to enjoy this full episode instead of the first 15 minutes like you are on our public forums, where you can get our match preview series like the Breaking Bread This, our Chopping It Up, where we have amazing guests on who cover the sport somehow, some way, or support it, and we just kind of discuss what they love about the game. Let's see, upcoming guests we have. We have Joe Bray from Manchester Evening News, Tom Harrison, Colin Savage, if anybody knows, he goes by Presswitch Blue on social media. Michael Reed, he is one of the main statisticians on Opta Joe for Liverpool. Yeah, just amazing people. So plenty more coming on our Patreon as well. $6 a month. That's just one beer, a cocktail if you live in the Midwest where I do, where you can just order a cocktail and it's nice and affordable. It's coffee, many of those things. Just forgo it one morning, one evening, afternoon if you're like me, and support a independent podcast. Wonderful show for you today, discussing Manchester City versus Crystal Palace. It's the early match, 6:30 a.m. where I am, Central Time. I know the early game is hated in England, but waking up here in the US and immediately having football on is the best. Coffee, breakfast, and football. Wonderful combination. As I said, wonderful guest for you. First time linking up with them, Shady Gang. Shout out 5-Year Plan Podcast. Here to help us learn about our upcoming opponent. Please welcome Joe Walker. How are you?
I'm very good. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. And it's interesting. I've not actually ever heard the kind of US perspective on those early kickoffs, but a sound reasoning. I'm with you. I very rarely have that experience of early start football matches, I suppose. There was a World Cup in Japan and South Korea where they would actually start school late. They allowed everyone to watch the game whenever England played and then come in.
I love that.
Yeah, that's as close as I've got it, I suppose. I was still a kid. Every now and then there'll be a boxing match in Australia, and the pay-per-view will be on sort of 10, 11 in the morning here. That's that, and you're right. That is actually very enjoyable. But yeah, I think you've got just about the good balance of it. Rather, you don't want it to be I know there's some that are in the middle of the night. People in some parts of the world having to be watching Premier League games at 3, 4 in the morning.
Yes. Our friends on the West Coast, they are up at 4:30 a.m. Shout out Hollywood MCFC, and so they get to the bar, and legally they can't drink until about, I think they said it's about the 60th minute. But once the 60th minute hits, they all run to the bar, get their drinks, and start having a good time. And where I live in the Midwest, there are a lot of third shift workers. So basically, they start letting you drink. It's pretty early. I've definitely gone to places and had them turn on the match, and I will have like a beer, or I'll throw some whiskey in my coffee while I have breakfast, because it's past noon in England, and I'm watching a match in England. It's the same thing.
You're hyped. It's like an airport drink. It's like
exactly.
It doesn't matter what time it is.
Time does not exist at an airport. You are very right. Well, let's start here. I love starting off with this question because it's always good to get the fans' perspective and helps me understand the club a little bit more. Why do you love Crystal Palace, and what's to you is the best quality about the club?
Why do I love Crystal Palace? I suppose that question, I have to be totally transparent, particularly at a club the size of Palace's and the history of it. Not really a Premier League regular, or not even a top flight regular until really the last 10, 15 years. There were fleeting visits over the prior sort of 10, 20 years. But before that, we were very much a second, third tier side. And the appeal of a club to those supporters tends to be locale. You grew up around the area. and often inherited from family. So in my case, my father was a supporter, but my grandmother also worked at the club
Mm.
in over a number of different roles over the years. So sometimes in the ticket office, sometimes sort of welcoming people to the hospitality areas, sometimes kind of working at the front desk of the main reception. So as a child, I was just kind of decked in staff discount funded merchandise, uh, you know, brought to every kind of. They used to have open days. There are less of those now, but pre-season days where you can come and meet the players and go on a fairground ride in the car park. I would be at every one of those. These kind of after school clubs. Um, I didn't really have a choice. I would say conditioned rather than brainwashed, but very much I was kind of pushed to love, and by the time I realised that that was the case, it didn't matter because I was already deeply infatuated with the club and had been going as long as I can remember. So that's why I love the club, I suppose. In terms of more current reasons, it then starts to evolve. You start to, as you become an adult, and your kind of childlike love of a football club, it's still there. You try to protect that
Mhm.
kind of optimism, um, but you start to think about the bigger reasons that you care so much. And I guess particularly with match days, there is this group of people. It fluctuates between 10, 20, but I will I will see them as often, sometimes more than my own family. And our only real connection and reason for meeting as often as we do is because of Palace. So there's this very interesting kind of what would you call it? Supplementary like family
Yes.
that is it's totally disconnected from the rest of your kind of social norms and groups that you've grown up with and spend time with. But they have as much power there, and you really feel, particularly a club like Palace's, that community vibe can be quite strong. Just because particularly when there are long spells not in the top flight, the attendances do almost plummet overnight, and that core is not very big. London's very big, but it's very
Yes.
competitive in terms of football. So
Yes.
if you're asking young people, like my equivalent of elementary school, for example, which is right by Sellers Park, I went there, and a lot of the children there who are sort of at that time second generation immigrants, um, they're the culture of going to particularly English football. I'm old enough to be the back end of. There was a sort of the hooliganism of the 80s
Yeah.
and early 90s really put off newcomers to football. It was very unwelcoming for families, and I began going after the kind of big cleanup of that. But naturally, the parents of like first generation immigrants were not telling their kids to go there because as far as they grew up knowing that as
Mm,
a hotbed
that's
for
fair.
horrible things. And so, how do you expect a child without that kind of help from a parent to go to a local game to say, don't pick the teams that are playing the most enjoyable football on TV and got your favorite players from your favorite video games and everything like that. No, go to the local place and support, and where the football standard is terrible. They might lose as many. They may lose more than they win. Never mind as many. Um, as you get older, you realise it's a hard case to make. You have to really
Mhm.
drag people along. So that core at Palace is quite small. It's very apparent in away games as well. It tends to be the same faces that you see every time, and I don't know. There's quite a charm to that I've just grown to. That I've sort of almost made that a part of my personality, if you like. So, yeah, that's Palace really. It still tries to, despite being a Premier League club, really try to lean on the what it means as a local identity. Which, to be fair, City have done as well. Man, like there is that every club tries to do it. It's just interesting all the different ways they can
Mhm.
take that because naturally every club in the Premier League who's there for a couple of years has global or fans from abroad, whether that's people that have moved away or people who have taken up the team, and they value as much as us. But it's interesting how that's managed. And with Palace, we're still very new in terms of that part of the journey. So a lot of our identity is still very much claiming South London as a whole, which is a gigantic area that doesn't actually have many clubs at the top level. There are a few in the sort of second or third tiers of English football, not that well supported. Chelsea would count as South London, but they claim as West London, and that's their vibe. South London has very little takers, and Palace's lack of success in the last 50 years, I'd say, has meant that we have failed to reach the potential of being the club that dominates the whole of South London. But we are getting there slowly. We seem to sign a lot of players, talented players that are from the area. So they're quite appealed by the idea of returning to South London. People like Eze, people like Mark Gay, and there's a few more I'm forgetting. We had Chalobah on loan from Chelsea early on in the season, who was from the local area but never played for Palace because Chelsea, Fulham, Arsenal, they all have much better academies, much more appealing facilities than Crystal Palace until recently. And so we've recently, despite having that identity, we've had to really deliver on the infrastructure to match that intent of being the South London club. It's all well and good saying that we are the team in South London to play for, but if you're training on kind of five-a-side pitches that, me or you can easily pay £60 for an hour on, then it's difficult to tell a 15-year-old to go there instead of these sort of multi-million-pound complexes that Chelsea have built or Arsenal have built. I love that. I love the club for trying to keep that identity as much as possible. But yeah, broader. I've done a very long version of saying my head was forced into it.
No, I love it. And shout out to a good friend of mine, Kenny. He lives very close to me. He is the Crystal Palace fan that I know. And he always pops up whenever Crystal Palace does something well, and because he's not a big social media guy. So he'll pop in and he'll be like, "Go Eagles," and then he kind of disappears. But when I lived closer to him, we would go to bars and watch games, and it's always good to tap in with him. And oddly enough, when I was growing up, and this was before I was like all in on football, but it would come on TV and I'd watch. But the teams who would play were Crystal Palace and Tottenham. For some reason in our region, those were the two teams that were always shown. So like, I have a soft spot in my heart for Crystal Palace, not Tottenham. Tottenham, the white kits weirded me out. It's just like, they're playing on grass. I don't get this. Why would they wear white kits? So yeah, it's Crystal Palace. If I were to pick a team in London, they're one of the teams that I very much enjoy.
Yeah, we've sort of that's funny enough. We've embraced that a little bit because even that's quite familiar rhetoric here. There are a lot of people who have grown up in South London as Manchester United fans, Arsenal fans, Liverpool fans, and in some cases Chelsea fans. And as Palace have now been the top in the Premier League for about 11, 12 years now, which is totally unprecedented, it's too late for them to change their mind, and they never would say it's just not the thing. But I've seen a lot of acknowledgement of they're my second team. I've got a soft spot for them because they're from the area. But now that we're doing so well, there's a little kind of a olive branch offered where they are starting to attend a little bit more, and they're starting to actually. It's an opportunity to see Premier League football where in their area, and we could be more hostile to that. And I actually think I'm quite pleasantly surprised how welcoming people have been to that, because some people get very strange about that kind of stuff, being like, where were you when, well, we didn't know there's memes, the beat it chick kind of stuff,
no, definitely. I don't get it as much anymore, but especially when we first started SOB, there were definitely City fans, and they still will, like ones who aren't familiar with us. You can tell that they're just waiting for me to say the wrong thing, and then they're just like, I knew it. And it's just like, bro, please chill. So like we just do what we do and go where we go. But I want to talk about Oliver Glasner, the Austrian gaffer for Crystal Palace. He took over from the club legend. I wanted to start off with some kindness, but y'all got that dinosaur out of London and brought in Glasner to finish the 23-24 season. And the club was on an upward trend. I was a bit worried about how this season started with Glasner. What was your opinion when Glasner took over from Hodgson, and do you believe he can be the guy to help the Eagles soar once again?
So to the first question about him, the kind of when he was appointed, all I really knew about him was that he'd won the Europa League with Eintracht Frankfurt, and because I think they beat Rangers in the final, or certainly they beat the Scottish team in that run. And as a result, it had been televised here quite prominently. And so I remember there being a lot of noise about how good they were. And I'd seen a bit of them, but it hadn't stayed in my mind. But I do think that I remember that was noted at the time as a very significant achievement. Eintracht Frankfurt were not a team with any kind of recent history or prestige.
Yeah.
So that piqued my interest. But the key at the time was we were a really unconfident, worryingly small squad and was struggling to get points. And I thought that's all well and good if what you can do with talented, exciting players. Has he got time to implement his style and turn it around for Palace to stay up? Because that was ultimately the position we'd found ourselves in. It's not an unfamiliar one, changing management halfway through a season. We've done it plenty in our time. And I guess it did take it. I think he won his very first game, but it was against Burnley